Well, I don't think that 3D printers are at the point where you can consider them as household or desktop appliances for the general population, like say a regular desktop printer. They are getting pretty close, and with the Anycubic Kobra S1's tagline, simple, one and done. Today we'll see if the printer belongs in every household for all family members, or is it still just for tinkerers and techie people who build FPV drones like myself? Stay tuned. Hey there everyone, Jeff here. Welcome back to Imagination Tech. So I think 3D printing is one of the great technological advancements that are really beneficial to the backyard mad scientists like you and me. And while I use them, I try not to talk too much about them or topics on 3D printing, so my viewers don't think this is a 3D printing channel, because it's not. But today is an exception, as I have here the Anycubic Kobra S1 combo, which I bought from Make It 3D. The Anycubic Kobra S1 combo is quite heavy, weighing in at 26 kilograms combined weight of the main 3D printer unit as well as the Ace Pro unit, plus add another 1 kilogram for the filament that Make It 3D sent me. I am a weakling, so it is a bit of a workout for me, but for a lot of people, you'd probably also want to have some help carrying this. As it was really heavy, the smartest choice when taking it out of the box is to tilt the box to its side while cutting open the bottom of the box. So you just need to lift the box up instead of lifting the Kobra S1 out. Since this was the combo version, it came with the Ace Pro multi-material system, which was securely fastened inside the Kobra S1 unit with screws. There isn't really anything to assemble aside from screwing in the filament hub, plugging in wires and the PTFE tubes between the Kobra S1 and the Ace Pro. In fact, you'll probably spend more time removing the screws that's used to secure the Kobra S1 and Ace Pro for shipping. You can watch my full unboxing in excruciating detail in my previous Anycubic Kobra S1 unboxing video. So far so good, the physical setup is easy enough for even a non-techie to do. Once you turn it on for the first time, it'll ask a few questions and will ask to connect to your Wi-Fi, and then show you a QR code that you will need to scan with your phone. This will lead you to your app store where you can download the Anycubic app. Once you've installed the app, you'll be asked to sign in or create an account. And you can now follow the buttons and instructions on the app to add your printer to your account. It'll ask you to scan the QR code once again, and then you can give your printer a custom name if you want to. We then head over back to the Kobra S1, where it will prompt you to insert the included flash drive, and afterwards proceed to do a slew of self-tests. It'll make some scary sounds as it figures out its axes and performs a vibration resonance test before finally leveling the bed. If you are watching this and are new to 3D printing, just know that all of those things I mentioned that the Kobra S1 did by itself, we used to have to do that manually on our own. Heading back to the app, we see that there is a firmware update. At the time of recording, this was on the 2.4.7.0, updating to the latest firmware at the time, 2.5.0.2. So note there might be some changes, fixes, or improvements since then. Once the update is finished, it'll ask you to manually switch the Kobra S1 off, then on again. Definitely a lot more setup than my air fryer, but still, anyone who is used to using a smartphone shouldn't have too much of a problem. Now we're done with the setup, let's start loading some filament into our Ace Pro. And all you have to do is push the end of the filament into the holes, and the Ace Pro will detect and grab the filament and start feeding it through. Once again, if you're new to 3D printing, you might not think much of it, but just a couple of years ago, automatic filament feeding was either non-existent or uncommon. You had to manually feed your filament into your print head and make sure melted filament was going out. So yeah, this automatic feeding is a big thing for me. Now here, I had some initial trouble when I didn't insert the filament fully, and the Ace Pro thinks it's grabbed onto the filament, but it didn't. So just make sure you feed it enough filament to grab onto, but once it starts pulling the filament on its own, it should be good to go. You can load all 4 slots or just the first one for now. Now, on the Kobra S1 screen, you can tap a slot and assign what filament material and color you put into that slot. I didn't have any Anycubic filament, but those ones also have an NFC tag built into their spools, so you don't even need to do this step. Notice the option below that says Filament Backup. If you select that and your other filament runs out, it'll switch to that filament automatically. Let's say your black filament is almost out. You can put another black filament spool in another slot, so when you print, it'll just continue using the current black filament till it runs out, then automatically switch to your backup black filament. Now that we've loaded our filament, we just go back to the printing menu and click Start Printing. From the USB drive, there is a Benchy file which we can print, and this will give us a good idea of just what kind of quality we can expect from this printer. It'll ask us which filament to use, whether we would be using the built-in filament dryer in the Ace Pro, and some more options like if you want to shoot a time-lapse, or level the bed again before you start printing, etc. Speaking of filament dryer for you 3D printing noobs, yes, you need to make sure your filaments are dry because they suck up moisture from the air like crazy. We used to have to buy a purpose-built filament dryer or DIY a fruit dryer, but now it's built in as well.
Some stringing, probably because I haven't dried my filament enough, but other than that, look at that detail, and overhangs are also really nice.
There's also a multicolor toy that you can print from the USB. As with the Benchy, you can select a few options before printing, and you can assign which filament slot replaces which color on the object. As this was just a test and I wasn't really interested in this thing, I just picked whatever was available. I aborted the multicolor print for now just by pressing the stop button. It came out okay, but I think I'll try to look for another multicolor object to test later on. For now, I need to pay my wife tax, so I'm printing her this small vase that she can place jewelry, keys, or trinkets in. To do that, I first need to download Anycubic Slicer next from the Anycubic website. A slicer is a software that converts your 3D object into commands for the 3D printer, and there are a ton of settings you can tune to make sure you get a good quality print. You can also use other slicer software like Orca Slicer, but I'll be sticking with Anycubic Slicer next for now as it has presets for this printer. Anycubic also runs the Maker Online website where you can find 3D objects you can print, and some of them even have print profiles tuned to your specific printer. Once Anycubic Slicer Next is installed, you can log in using the account we created on the app earlier. If you've already spent some time on the Maker Online website and saved some things that you like into a collection, you can find them directly in Anycubic Slicer Next by clicking Collections/Likes. And here my wife has conveniently added 2 things she wants into this collection. You can just click Download and Open, and it'll open it up in the slicer, so that's very convenient. The uploader of this object already has its own preset in, but it's for a different printer, so we're not going to use that. Instead, we are going to choose the Kobra S1 system preset for our printer. As I mentioned, there are tons of settings you can change, and in the past, you really had to dial this in, both for your printer and for the specific filament you're using, and sometimes it could mean the difference between a successful print and a failed print. So I was just curious what settings the presets had. We're not going to touch anything for now, so we can click the Preview tab or Slice Plate. Once it slices the object into layers, which is why it's called a slicer and which is how a 3D printer prints, we can inspect the layers if you wish. We can then click Remote Print to send it to the Kobra S1. Here you'll notice that the filament I set on the Kobra S1 is reflected in the app as well. And I will select the red filament, enable time-lapse and AI detection, as well as turn on the dryer while it's printing. Now we just click Start Print. After less than a minute, the printer would have downloaded the object and will come live as it starts its job, and you can monitor it here in real time. So while it's printing, I can go back to the Prepare tab, I can add a new plate and go back to the collections that my wife prepared and prepare the next thing she wants, which is this knitted bowl. One thing I forgot to do, or rather didn't know I could do initially, was to sync my slicer with the filaments in my Ace Pro, and you do that by clicking this button, and it'll refresh with whatever filaments you set on the Ace Pro via the Kobra S1 screen. One thing you should know if you're printing multicolor is that it generates a lot of what the community affectionately calls poop. Whenever the printer changes filament colors, it purges a certain amount of filament so that you don't get any bleeding from 2 colors or filaments mixing together. This creates a lot of poop, some objects more than others, but a lot in general. The Kobra S1 has a poop chute in the back, and I initially just used the same box for my print waste to catch them. But you can also print one of the several poop slides the community has made, like this one that goes to the right side of the Kobra S1, but I found that the poop sometimes stops mid-slide. This one on the left side has a steeper slide, so less chance of things getting stuck. That is, until the bin gets filled up, after which the poop will start crawling back up the butthole like when printing overnight. and when that happens, it can affect your print as it's not able to expel the waste. So do keep that in mind when doing a long or overnight print. There's also been criticism that the Ace Pro changes filament slower than a Bamboo Lab AMS or AMS Lite, but since I don't have any of those systems, I can't really comment on that. I can confirm though that multiple color changes throughout the print does have a big impact on total print time. Before we go any further, I encourage you to subscribe if you aren't already and click that like button as well. Also consider becoming one of our Patreons where you'll find exclusive bonus and behind the scenes content on the Kobra S1 and other projects. After a few hours, my wife now had that red vase cup thing as well as this beautiful knitted bowl. Yes, it took a few hours, but that is actually blazingly fast, about 3 to 4 times faster compared to my previous printer, as this could print up to 300 millimeters per second and still output prints at a high quality. So all in all, as an appliance or from a non-techie point of view, the Kobra S1 really is so easy and simple to use. You search for a 3D object or STL file, as we've grown accustomed to calling it, load it up into the slicer and hit print, and for the most part, that's it. The presets are pretty spot on, so you don't have to adjust anything. Though for those of you who are new to 3D printing, I would recommend you learn about supports and brims, as you would inevitably need that for some trickier prints. But overall, for 90% of people who have not yet tried 3D printing, you can buy a Kobra S1 and get printing on the same day. But I am not part of the 90% because as someone who flies FPV drones, I need to be able to print parts in TPU. TPU is a flexible filament, as opposed to regular PLA, PETG, or ABS. Flexible filaments like TPU, as well as other filaments that are too hard or too brittle, such as carbon fiber, glass fiber, PLA silk, and luminous materials, are specifically stated as not compatible with the Ace Pro. No problem, right? Yeah, except if you got the combo, which I recommend you do, the manual makes no mention of how to load filaments not using the Ace Pro. I went onto the online wiki and it's basically the same thing as the manual that came in the box. If you had 3D printing experience, you can probably figure this out on your own with a bit of trial and error, but eventually after some googling, I found the manual for the non-combo version of the Kobra S1, and it was not from the Anycubic website. It's not overly complicated, but the steps are specific enough that it should have been in the manual or wiki for the Kobra S1 combo as well. So it kind of tells us who the Kobra S1 really is marketed and designed for. And speaking of target market, there are gonna be people who will not be happy about the overall simplified user experience like this guy and other ultra tech bros. I understand what he said and I understand where he's coming from, but to 3D printing newbies, you probably won't, and you probably won't need to, at least when you're starting out. And that's probably a good thing. It's a step further to 3D printers being as user-friendly as an inkjet printer. Alright, so now we've loaded our TPU. We've confirmed that the hot end has extruded some material and we're ready to print. On the Kobra S1, we set the filament to TPU. We also check that TPU is selected in the slicer as well. And this is important because TPU, being a flexible material, requires slightly different settings compared to PLA to get the best quality out of it. Once again, out of the box, this thing prints with TPU great, even on the stock presets. With all the tech built into the Kobra S1, like the filament sensors in the hot end, filament hub and Ace Pro, and the automatic filament loading and unloading, the average Joe should have no problem whatsoever, at least in theory. I've been printing daily almost non-stop since getting this printer over 3 weeks ago, and have yet to have issues with regular PLA. But I do think that you should still be prepared in case you get a clog. Normally, the printer will detect if there is a clog and will ask you to resume or stop the print. If you press resume, it's gonna try again, and that could potentially clear up any clogs. In my case, this happened when I was trying to print this dual color PLA, and for some reason, it was chewing up the filament in the hot end. Resuming it would get it printing for a while, but it would just get clogged up again after. After resuming a few times, I also encountered a bug in the software where the hot end wouldn't heat back up anymore, no matter how many times you tried to resume it, so you had no choice but to stop the print. I expect that would get fixed in a firmware update, so let's focus on the clog, which we can fix on our own. Once again, the manual didn't say anything about what to do when you get a clog, but thankfully, the online wiki had some more information about it. From here, we're starting to venture into hobbyist/tinkerer territory. But at least for the tools, you're still not going to need anything else aside from the Allen keys you got in the package. The only thing that wasn't described thoroughly was actually opening the printhead, which is just secured with some latches, and we just need to squeeze the sides a bit. With a brand new Kobra S1, it's not gonna come off easily at first. The first instinct I had was to try removing the filament cutter just above the heat break, and I only needed to remove 3 screws. In my case, my filament was getting shredded just as it was entering the heat break and heat sink, so just removing the filament cutter exposed the clogged filament. I also removed the 3 screws holding the hot end so I could angle it better to pull out the clog, but I didn't remove the hot end completely. I thought I lost the footage of me unclogging the printhead, so I purposely clogged my hot end again to shoot this reenactment. But actually, I just misplaced the original footage into the wrong folder. At least I have camera angle choices. In this reenactment, the filament was still in one piece, so I put back the filament cutter and pressed on the lever to cut it. Eventually, I figured out for this particular filament, it didn't like going through the Ace Pro, but direct feeding it just like with the TPU prevented the filament from getting shredded, or at least until you finish a print or stop it. Then it seems to want to get itself clogged again. In short, it doesn't like being retracted after a print and going back and forth through the extruder gear. Aside from the hot end clogging issue, I also experienced a weird kinking issue with my Ace Pro. And the reason I call it weird is because I was using regular PLA, and this happened only once, and this has not happened again since, nor do I see this happening to people online. Unfortunately for me, but fortunately for you, it happened to me and I also figured out how to fix this. So what was happening was the Ace Pro was pulling in the filament, but it was not pushing it out. My theory is there was a clog in the hot end or the filament got stuck somewhere, but the Ace Pro was continuing to push filament and that forced the filament to go somewhere. So that was the clue. It was pulling filament from the top, but it wasn't moving on the other end. First, I tried checking the Ace Pro buffer as stated on the wiki page on clogs. The filament was there in the buffer, but it was stuck and wasn't moving. I then tried pulling the filament from the top, which under normal circumstances shouldn't take a lot of force, but unfortunately the filament snapped. I tried feeding it filament again, but it was just making clicking noises. I found this other wiki page on how to replace the main board of the Ace Pro, and thankfully I didn't have to go that far, but it showed me how to open up the Ace Pro enough to find the issue. So the first step is to unscrew the Ace Pro buffer and also unscrew the signal input cover plate and the power cover plate. Next, we'll have to remove the 6 screws at the bottom. I also had to peel off 2 of the rubber feet. Just keep it somewhere clean and away from dust as we'll need to stick it back on. Next, I unscrewed the 2 screws on both sides of the multicolor outer shell. It does take some force to pull the shell off, but once I did that, I realized all those screws I undid at the bottom and back were totally unnecessary, as I could have checked here directly. This is where the filament kinked and got stuck. After putting it back and screwing it all back in, it's the moment of truth. Success! The Anycubic Kobra S1 is a great printer that's targeted for beginners. You can get really nice prints out of the box without even knowing anything about bed leveling, and even has more advanced tech like vibration compensation and pressure sensors in the extruder, which was either not available to previous generation printers or it was something you had to mess with manually. The Kobra S1 is a huge step towards 3D printers reaching the level of household appliances and ubiquity that is pretty much true up until you get a clog, where you'll suddenly find yourself becoming a 3D printer hobbyist. If you fly FPV drones or have experience with 3D printers before, then none of this will be a problem. That said, some 3D printing hobbyists may find the lack of things to tinker with quite limiting. I don't think there's any custom firmware or the sort available for this at the moment, but mods are already starting to be created and published online, so who knows what the future holds for this printer. For me though, I much prefer printing stuff and working on my FPV drones and other hobbies rather than constantly fiddling with my printer, which is why I chose this printer and I'm very happy with it. So there you have it. I hope this video helps in your buying decision if you're considering buying the Anycubic Kobra S1 combo, and I hope you appreciate the time and effort I put into making this video. So do consider subscribing and hit that like button if you like this video so more people can see it and see if the Kobra S1 is right for them. Do also check my Patreon as I will be putting some exclusive stuff on there. Anyway, I will leave you with that. As always, keep building and keep flying.